The Prinny Presents lines of games from NIS America are essentially ports of classic NIS games that have been brought forward to the Nintendo Switch via double packs. Today we're talking about Vol.2, but there is of course a Vol.1 already available, and a Vol.3 is due to release in September 2022. The Prinny collections focus on various strategy RPGs from the past, and while they do have some minor upscaling and visual options, they are largely unchanged from the originals. From my own personal experience, I can say with some confidence that these double packs will be interesting to both fans of the originals and new players who have never even heard of these games before. So what's included in this double pack? Well, you get 2 games from the PS2 and PSP era, which are Makai Kingdom Reclaimed and Rebound, as well as ZHP Unlosing Ranger vs Dark Death Evilman. If you're a fan of physical games, then you'll be happy to know that both of these are on the one cartridge and playable with no downloads required. There's also a deluxe edition that you can find pretty easily, and a limited edition which is only available from the NIS online store. I'll leave a link to both of those in the video description if you want to check them out for yourself. As I mentioned earlier, both games have some minor upscaling and some filter options which are supposed to smooth out the pixels and make everything look a little bit cleaner. Personally, I don't really like what it does to the visuals, and I think it makes everything look a little bit blurry, so I played with all of those options turned off. The first game, Makai Kingdom, is a tactical or strategy RPG which is very much in the same vein as the Disgaea games. If you've ever played one of those games before, you'll basically know what to expect, as Makai Kingdom is actually a spin-off of the Disgaea series. Of course, the characters, story, and some of the mechanics will be different, but overall they're very similar, even down to the art style and the humor. You play as an overlord named Zeta who's transformed into a book after his netherworld is destroyed. Being unable to do much about it himself, he has to recruit various classes of characters in order to do his bidding. You can create characters from loads of different inanimate objects such as rocks or plants, and they'll gain bonus stats depending on what you use. A character created from a rock will have more defense, for example. There's all sorts of classes to choose from as well, including warriors, magicians, thieves, and tons more. The game's all about rebuilding Zeta's netherworld, and you'll be basically starting from scratch. The area that you control starts off quite barren and empty, but over time you'll unlock new facilities, services, merchant, and options to make use of. Each of your characters can be named, leveled up, and equipped with gear to increase their stats and make them more formidable in combat. There is a huge amount of options for the player, with more becoming available as you progress through the story, although these games do usually revolve around grinding. You'll be playing through story missions as well as side content, and you'll have the ability to replay any of the maps that you've already cleared for more XP, money, and gear. I think a lot of players out there see grinding as a negative thing, but then again these games are quite niche, and there is a small subsection of players who really enjoy grinding for levels or equipment. Either way though, it's something that potential players should be aware of. It's also worth pointing out that the game contains another mode of play called Peta Mode, which features a story involving Zeta's daughter, named Peta, as she travels back in time. The second game on the cartridge is ZHP Unlosing Ranger vs Dark Death Evilman. This is another strategy RPG, but this time it plays much more like a cross between a tactical RPG and a mystery dungeon RPG. You play as a new Unlosing Ranger, a silent protagonist who's taken over the role after the original's unfortunate accident. The game presents itself as a humorous, tongue-in-cheek homage to tokusatsu shows such as Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, Ultraman, Power Rangers, and VR Troopers. The big bad guy of the story is known as Dark Death Evilman, and he's kidnapped the Super Baby who, as the prophecy states, is destined to grow up to be the savior of the world. Your job as the Unlosing Ranger is to stop the bad guy and rescue the Super Baby. The game has a massive amount of character customization, and you're essentially building and creating your very own Power Ranger character from scratch, complete with gear, abilities, skills, special attacks, and loads more. You'll also have access to a command center that serves as your home base. It has all of the services and facilities that you need, with more being unlocked as you progress. In terms of combat, it's a grid-based system, but as I said earlier, it functions a lot more like a mystery dungeon game. Every time you make a move on the grid, your enemies also make a move. You're able to pick up items off the ground which you can either use or equip, but you actually have a very limited amount of space in your inventory. Each item you use will gradually degrade until it's useless, forcing you to discard it or throw it at an enemy for a bit of damage. You do level up while exploring the game's randomly generated dungeons, but that level resets when you exit that map. However, there is an overall level that takes into account what you've done in the dungeons. That level doesn't reset, and as it rises, more options become available to the player. So, even though you go into a dungeon at level 1 every time, you are always getting stronger. As before, this is a game that virtually demands that you grind, and if that's really not your thing, then that's understandable. Having said that, I think that fans of Disgaea and/or Mystery Dungeon games should feel right at home. So how was my time with this double pack? Well, first off, it's been a mostly positive experience. I will admit that I do lean much more towards the Power Rangers themed game because I am a huge fan of tokusatsu stuff in general. I always have been, honestly. I mean, I was never really into Marvel or DC or anything like that, so I grew up with the Power Rangers and VR Troopers being my superheroes. So I guess Makai Kingdom is kinda like a bonus game for me within this double pack, and I've definitely put more time into ZHP over Makai. That said, I do think both games are pretty great. As far as I know, Makai Kingdom was originally released worldwide on the PS2 in 2005, and it got an enhanced port to the PSP in 2011, but that was only in Japan. Needless to say, picking up and playing a legitimate copy of either game is going to be quite difficult for most people in 2022. That's why I personally think that these Prinny collections are a really good idea. It's always a nice thing to be able to own games from so many years ago on a current console such as the Nintendo Switch. And to be honest, I do want to go back and play the 2 games in the Volume 1 collection and play Volume 3 as well. I think that I'll have to have a chat with NIS and see what I can do on that front. If I have no luck, I'll probably just buy them anyway. But in terms of the games themselves, it would be rather disingenuous of me to say that the games look incredible, because, well, they don't. They do look a little bit dated, and that's just kinda how it is. These aren't really remasters or anything like that, they are marginally upscaled ports with some optional filters. As I said at the start, I don't really like what the smoothing filters do, so I just turned them all off. I prefer to see these games as intended and as they used to be, with the blocky pixel art intact. I mean, I suppose if they completely redrew the sprites in HD or perhaps even created 3D models, then it would be a different story. I'm personally just happy with how they look because that's pretty much how it's meant to look, but I do absolutely understand it if you happen to hate it. I did find that the lack of visual fidelity is a much more obvious thing when you play it through your TV. That said, if you play it in handheld mode on the Switch's 720p screen, I think it genuinely looks really good. I'd imagine even more so if you have a Switch OLED. Gameplay wise, we'll start with Makai Kingdom. I think it's pretty cool. I like the combat system and the fact that you have so many options when building and equipping your party. It just helps to keep you invested in what's going on. I really like the pixel art, and the story, while basic at the beginning, was pretty fun to watch it unfold. It's also really quite funny in places. The humor really did line up for me, and I found a lot of the dialogue to be really charming, and it actually made me smile a couple of times, which is good. The combat itself looks pretty good and the attacks are quite nice to watch, but there's also a lot of button presses and menu navigation to get where you need to go. I know that it's just a product of its time and I wouldn't really call it a negative, but some parts of the game do feel a little bit outdated. Again, that's to be expected considering the age of the games and the fact that they aren't remakes. Knowing that doesn't really make things feel any better to, a new player or even an old player, but at least you can understand what's going on. The same can be said for ZHP, to be fair. I do prefer it because of the theme and the fact that I prefer Mystery Dungeon games over Disgaea type games. I think this one looks a little bit better overall, but considering that it released much later than Makai Kingdom in the first place, I don't think it's much of a surprise. I really like the turn-based I go, you go Mystery Dungeon combat where you're essentially making use of the stuff you find laying around, as well as the gear that you bring with you, of course. It kind of reminded me of an old PS1 game that I used to love called Azure Dreams. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that one. I think it was released by Konami in 97 or something like that. I'd love for that to get a remaster or even an upscale port like the Prinny collections, along with Golden Sun, maybe? That'd be pretty cool. I mean, I don't suppose that's ever going to happen, but a man can dream, I suppose. ZHP does still have that old school feeling, but I suppose depending on who you are, that's probably a good thing. I'd imagine that people around my age, 34, will most likely want it to be as faithful to the original as possible, while some of the outdated systems will simply annoy younger players. And of course, I mean no disrespect to younger players when I say that, it's just kinda how it is. The story in ZHP was again really funny, with a lot of chuckle-inducing lines and ridiculous over-the-top characters. Something I haven't mentioned yet is that both games do feature full Japanese and English voice acting. As you know, I always go for English dubs when they're available, and I thought the performances were really good. The voice work sounded very naturally delivered, and I got the feeling that they knew how stupid everything was, and they just decided to give it their all and ham it up as much as possible.
Where is the unlosing ranger? It was he who challenged me, and he dares make me wait, and he calls himself a hero. He's probably shivering in fear somewhere, crying his pitiful man tears of pity.
Luckily, I'd say that's exactly what a spoof Power Rangers game should sound like, and for my tastes, it works really well. Lastly, I just wanted to let you know that I had one crash while playing ZHP and none while playing Makai Kingdom, although do keep in mind that I played ZHP quite a bit more. In my opinion, the second volume of Prinny Presents is an enjoyable trip back in time, but having said that, I don't really know how many new fans these games will create. With these collections being, for the most part, simple ports of 2 games from over 10 years ago, I just don't see them being of interest to many younger players. I feel like these collections are generally for the older fans, you know, the ones who've already played them before, or perhaps the ones who meant to play them but never got around to it. Ultimately, these are very faithful, upscaled ports of 2 classic games, and I have to say, I think NIS is doing a good thing here. Collecting all of the Prinny Presents double packs would be a great thing to own for the future, and there is a lot of content packed into these games. Maybe the visuals and the gameplay don't hold up as well as I'd like, but at the end of the day, these are older games from a niche genre, and they do have their audience. I think it's great that they're being made available on modern hardware for the players that actually want them, and if you've never tried them before, now might be the time. If you enjoyed the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.